Hey guys, welcome back to Games of War. Today's episode, I'm trying to film with a new camera, so please let me know if you like this camera better or if I should just go back to using the old camera. And today's episode is one that I've been thinking about quite a bit lately, and it's only recently set in that the PlayStation 3 came out 10 years ago. And it's gotten to the point now where I remember the launch and shortly thereafter very vividly, and it was not a good time to be a PlayStation owner, PlayStation 3 especially. Now, first, a little bit of backstory as to why I say this. Now, coming off of the PlayStation 2, Sony was riding on Cloud 9. They were by far and away the #1 selling console across the world. It seemed that they could do no wrong, and the transition from the PS2 to the PS3 was all but guaranteed to pick up right where they left off and continued their lead into the next generation. Now, I will go on record and say this. I don't think there's ever been a year head start that was more important than the Xbox 360's year lead over the PS3. It gave it time to really establish itself as a serious contender because let's not forget, the original Xbox was Microsoft's first entry into the console market, and they had a lot of learning to do. They pushed Xbox Live heavily towards the end, and the Xbox did respectable. It did what its purpose was, and that was to get Microsoft's foot in the door. As soon as the 360 was announced, and as soon as the 360 became available, production on the Xbox stopped. It was gone, done, boom, over with. And the 360 was brought into the market. And by the time the PS3 launched in November of 2006, Microsoft had a year head start and released amazing games such as Cameo and The First Condemned. These were my first two games on the Xbox, and I was completely blown away. HD graphics were brand new, HD TVs were very new, and finally getting an HD TV and playing these two games for the first time, seeing them in motion, was quite a sight to behold. The Xbox 360 was without a doubt a very powerful machine, and I was extremely impressed. The great games didn't stop coming on the 360. We got games like Crackdown, Lost Planet, 99 Nights, GamezOfWar, and the thing is, all of these games at the time, Dead Rising, Saints Row, they were all exclusive because there was no other HD console to put it out for. So the Xbox 360 had a big lead and had a lot of great games when the PS3 finally launched in November. And launch it did. I call it more of a stumble, however you want to look at it. The PS3 was announced, and it was including cell technology, which was a brand new processor that was very complex. Now, the PS2 had a very complex architecture and chip called the Emotion Engine, and it was thought to be very powerful, which it later turned out to be. But in the beginning, it was very hard to program for. It wasn't quite like the Dreamcast, where it was relatively easy to program for. It took a while for them to catch on. The cell was even more complicated than that. It really presented a lot of challenges. Core technology and cell chips were very new at the time, and people just didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to harness that power. Another problem was that a new format was emerging in the form of Blu-ray and HD DVD. And of course, like the PS2, Sony putting a DVD player in there to kind of bring in a new format, they also did that with Blu-ray. And it made for an expensive machine. Blu-ray players at the time were very expensive, making the PS3 the most affordable Blu-ray player on the market. However, the $599 price tag was like approaching like 3DO levels of disaster. It was just way too expensive for the console, and it was really a deterrent when the Xbox 360 was cheaper. It had been out a year, so it had a lot of great games already established on it. So the PlayStation 3 was starting from a disadvantage already. So it might seem difficult for a company to go from #1, the very best, top-selling, most popular console, hands down, to going from the top first to dead last over the course of 6 months to a year. And that's exactly what Sony did with the PS3. Now, it ended up overall in the very end, I think, outselling the PS3 on a worldwide scale. I think the 360 might have sold a little more in North America. I could be wrong, but it ended up, I think, finishing overall. So they got their shit together towards the end. But man, I'll tell you what, if you were a PlayStation 3 only owner in those first, I'd say as far as 2 years, it was pretty brutal. Now, I didn't get one on the launch when it was like Christmas time of that holiday. I didn't get one until MotorStorm came out, which was, I believe, March of 2007. So when I picked up my launch PS3, I got the console, and I got MotorStorm and Resistance. Now, I always knew that I wanted Resistance. I thought it looked like a really impressive launch title. The problem was that they were hyping up the Cell processor so much and saying it was so much more powerful than the 360 and was capable of so many different things, that when Resistance hit, and it was likely the most hyped of the launch titles, and the graphics weren't anything like crazy above the 360. Maybe not even as impressive as some of the better looking games that were on the 360 at the time. It called into question that doubt, that feeling of, man, is this worth the money? Is this better? Because the graphics, although very good in Resistance Fall of Man, they weren't mind-blowingly amazing, better than the 360. So that was a problem right off the bat. And I kind of waited on the PlayStation 3 because I was really enjoying the 360. And in part two, because it was really expensive, man. Like I said, the $600 price point, it wasn't very friendly to the wallet. But MotorStorm came out, and MotorStorm was being hyped up as like this amazing off-road racer, and like you would race through these tracks and they could be covered in mud, and you would see like your tires carve mud tracks through the courses, and those like rivets and divots would still be in the next lap, so you could get stuck in these divots and it would play into the courses, and the terrain morphing technology was amazing. And what we got was something a little under that. I remember the terrain being cool, and you could still, you know, cut divots and realistic reactions of the mud and stuff around your tires, but I don't remember it kind of really hindering your racing or kind of factoring into the gameplay very much. Still a really impressive game. There was some really long load times in MotorStorm, so that kind of took away some of the excitement. And unfortunately, the original MotorStorm was really crash happy. And what I mean by that is, if you so much as grazed a wall, you'd just explode into a fiery mess, and that got really frustrating playing MotorStorm. Combine that with some long load times, and the track design, while very good, every track kind of looked the same. Everything was brown and mud, and it was a good game, but it wasn't... Let's put it this way, I bought the PS3, I think the next day, maybe 2 days after, I was back to playing my 360, and aside from a few more launch titles, in terms of like exclusive big titles, this was it. And this was already, what, 6 months on the market. So after these two games were hit, then became the really bad stuff. After waiting months of dry spells while the 360 was continuing to flourish, there was hints of a game coming out by Factor 5, who was renowned for their shooters and Star Wars games. And that game was getting considerable hype, presented in full 1080p HD. That game was none other than Lair. And now there was a lot of hype, a lot of the PlayStation fanboys, because at this time it was getting pretty brutal, where the Xbox fanboys were attacking Sony owners, saying the system was a piece of shit, it was worthless, it was dead in the water, good for nothing, you know, do a start over, redo it. And Lair had a lot riding on its shoulders. And apart from pushing the new 6-axis controls, which was another big mistake, the Sony controller took out the rumble option, so it was not a DualShock 3, it was the 6-axis controller. So there was no rumble in the controller, which doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but when you get down to it, it kind of is a big deal. It really took away from the experience. Basically what the 6-axis was trying to cash in on a little bit of the success that the Wii was having with its motion controls. Now, the 6-axis in theory worked, but to kind of build an entire game around a control scheme that didn't really add or make the game any more special wasn't a very good idea. And that's a big fault that this game just got slammed for, was the motion controls, that they didn't work well, that it was awful, it was horrible to play. And Lair came out and got universally panned. Everybody hated the game, and that just gave 360 owners and gamers alike that much more fuel to the fire to really shit on the PS3 even more. Lair was a big failure. I believe it even caused Factor 5 to shut down the money they lost on this, and it was probably other factors as well. But Lair failed miserably, and to me, I absolutely really did like Lair. I'm one of the few that really liked it. It's got an amazing soundtrack. The controls work just fine. They later patched regular analog controls. By that time, the damage was done. It was too late. But it wasn't the controls that ruined this game for me. For me, the levels themselves are what ruined this game, not the motion controls. If you could fly on your dragon, fly through beautiful kingdoms, get to a new kingdom, land, jump off your dragon, cut through soldiers, talk to people, get story clues, meet new characters, get your mission, what you have to do, jump back on your dragon, fly to the next kingdom, explore an overall huge land, and kind of like an action RPG like that, this would be an amazing game. The mission variety in this was very repetitive. There was a lot of escort stuff, guard a convoy, just land and clear all the enemies out, and then specifically get right back on your dragon and fly around some more. The mission variety in this game really, really lacked. And that's what killed it for me. It wasn't the controls. But overall, I did like Lair. But for the rest of us still waiting for that one PlayStation exclusive that would really show the console off, what it could do, the next attempt, or go ahead it was Heavenly Sword, released shortly after Lair, a few months, I think, maybe 4 or 5 months. Heavenly Sword was a step in the right direction. This game never got a sequel. Developed by Ninja Theory, it introduced us to Nariko, and this had some really cool uses of the 6-axis controls. It wasn't as prevalent as Lair, but there was some shooting sections where you play as Nariko's companion. I think it's Twing Twang, I think the game is called. And you use the 6-axis to aim and use motion controls to shoot, which was a small part of the game. But it was cool. It was well done. It wasn't overly used. Didn't feel real gimmicky. But Heavenly Sword was a very good-looking game. A few stutters here and there. But the problem with Heavenly Sword, it was very short. A very, very short game. What was there was great. The combat was great. They were taking this and calling it the female God of War, and people were talking shit about that. But overall, Heavenly Sword was a step in the right direction. Despite its short length, it was a very good game. Now, a few more heavy hitters came out quietly, but these games appealed more to the niche RPG fans than the masses that were craving good games. We quietly got Folklore and Valkyria Chronicles. Now, I got Folklore first, and while it got very good reviews, and Folklore is a great game, very atmospheric, I absolutely loved the gameplay, playing as Keats, a reporter for a supernatural magazine, and Ellen, who is going there to try to find her dead mother, I believe. She got a note saying that she was waiting for her in Doolin or something along those lines. And it's a spiritual, kind of folklore-ish tale where you go and meet with these creatures of the dead, and you enter the land of the dead, and you're able to kind of capture creatures in like a Pokemon fashion and use their powers. And it's just overall a really, almost like an enchanting game. I know it sounds corny, but it's very magical, folklore, very atmospheric. Had a lot of fun. The music was great. But this game didn't get the recognition it deserved from players. A lot of people didn't even pay attention to this release. Valkyria Chronicles, rather, was kind of more of the same. It was a very fun game, a very impressive game. The problem is it just wasn't for the mass audience that was craving the next big hit. RPG fans were thrilled, and they are both exclusive, remain to this day. Valkyria Chronicles still goes on. Folklore is a one-off game. But two great games that came out that just kind of went unnoticed. Another blow to the PlayStation 3 came shortly into 2008. There was another exclusive that was being hyped up from a well-known first-person shooter developer, and that game was none other than Haze. And this was another exclusive that was had a lot of weight on its shoulders, had a lot riding on this. PlayStation 3 owners were saying, you know what, it's coming now, this is going to be the one game that we're going to be able to rub in your faces, this is going to be the exclusive that sells the system. Sadly, Haze just bombed. It didn't get good reviews, people hated it. I thought the game was okay. I mean, it was fun, but it didn't do anything new, and it wasn't up to Free Radical standards. They did some really amazing work with Time Splitters, and this just wasn't up to par. And it did nothing but hurt the PlayStation 3 more. People were just making fun of this console. I remember on the message boards and IGN and a few other places, the PS3 was just getting dogged left and right, and Haze did not help. It was getting really bad because one of the problems with the PlayStation 3 as well was that because of the cell processor and the complexity of developing games, a lot of the multi-platform games that were coming out for both the 360 and PS3 were performing considerably worse on the PlayStation 3. And in some cases, it was a pretty big, drastic difference where the 360 version was outperforming it in every way, frame rate, visuals, and that became another element of just throwing salt on the wound in the PlayStation 3. It was a rough time. The games ran better on 360, so of course word started to spread, and the 360 gained more momentum, while the PS3 was starting to look at as like an inferior console. All the while, still without a big, huge exclusive that was, AAA that really got the system going. Now, meanwhile, as the PlayStation 3 was pumping out exclusive turd after exclusive turd, and it seemed to be getting worse and worse, the 360 was still on fire, pumping out amazing games like BioShock, and then Mass Effect, which is a very popular series. At the time, both were exclusive to the 360, so it seemed that it was just getting worse and worse. But then, something happened. I think if memory serves correctly, around 2009, maybe mid-2009, 2010, something happened and the pendulum started to shift. Somewhere along the line, we got Ratchet and Clank, and this kind of really impressed people. This was promising near Pixar-like visuals, and it delivered. It was a fantastic game. Ratchet was a very popular series on the PS2, and on the PS3, it shone beautifully. The graphics were very close to Pixar quality, a very good-looking game. This game was popular, and then after I remember playing Ratchet, we got another huge game. the original Uncharted. Both critically and players alike were just in love with this game. Finally making good on the graphical prowess of the PlayStation 3, this game was one of the best looking, if not the best looking game in the generation to date up to this point. Amazing graphics, it was fun, it was charming. Nathan Drake was a really likable new character, Naughty Dog, who had worked their magic on Crash Bandicoot and other great games. Really knocked it out of the park with Uncharted. This gave the PlayStation a new lease on life. It was popular, it was cool, and it was exclusive. After Uncharted, we saw another studio from Sony, Sucker Punch, get into the ring with Infamous, and this was another game that was very well received. It looked amazing. The gameplay was great. It was a superhero game with a twist. You had the powers of electricity in this, playing as Cole, able to go on like a good guy path or a bad guy path. This game was kind of open world. It was a lot of fun. It looked great, and it was another great exclusive that you could only get on PlayStation. And quietly, From Software, a developer working on another sleeper hit that would hit on the PlayStation, was Demon's Souls. Now this game was very important to the PlayStation 3. This has spawned a huge franchise that continues strong to this day. This gave PlayStation owners another exclusive to be happy and content with. It was brutally hard. This called back to a certain kind of gamer that loved old school challenge with new play mechanics and updated graphics and feature set, a revolutionary online system, playing as Phantoms coming back. It was an amazing game, the start of a new franchise, and it was exclusive to PlayStation 3. And then the big guns started dropping. We got the immensely popular God of War series on the PlayStation 2. We finally got a follow-up to God of War in the form of God of War 3. Incredible visuals, once again showing that PlayStation 3 was an extremely capable machine if properly developed for. God of War 3 was a big hit. This game, still to this day, is highly impressive. It looks amazing. It was awesome to see a popular franchise return. And at this point, the PlayStation 3 was starting to get viewed much differently. It had a price cut, so the price was more competitive. The system had a redesign. There was the PlayStation 3 Slim. There was a whole backwards compatibility debacle where they removed features, because originally that high price of the PlayStation 3, you got what you paid for in the form of getting an emotion engine built into the system, which allowed you to play PS2 games upscaled to HD, which was really cool. A lot of people really liked that feature. To save costs, it was removed, but the price was dropped, and this was another factor in the turning momentum of the PlayStation 3 picking up steam. Now by this point, the multi-platform games were kind of getting sorted out to where things were on par, where you could rest easy that if you bought the PlayStation 3 version, it would be virtually identical to the 360 version, if not very close. In some cases, the PS3 version was the lead developed unit. It was outperformed the 360 version, so the tide started shifting in that as well. And then we started seeing old PlayStation 2 classics returning in the form of HD remasters, which is kind of a point of contention among a lot of people. Some people loved seeing packaged remasters of like the Jak and Dexter series, the Sly Cooper series, Echo Shadow of the Colossus, which I absolutely love. I can't wait for The Last Guardian. Back on topic, HD remasters started taking off, and you started seeing collections of all your favorite games remastered in HD for better or for worse. But that trend kind of started on the PlayStation 3 and really exploded around that time. Another aspect that really drew me to the PlayStation 3 in its later years was the emerging JRPGs and the kind of niche genre. Now here we have a collection of games that has Journey, Flow, and Flower. And these are the kind of games that were coming out on PSN, which up until that point was getting destroyed by Xbox Live. People preferred Xbox Live. Although you had to pay for it, it offered a more seamless experience and had a lot of great games in the Xbox Live Arcade. But the PlayStation Network started to come into its own, giving us masterpieces like Journey, which was just an oral and visual experience. It was an amazing game. Same thing with Flower. Very much well received by players and critics alike. These games were experiences unto themselves, and Flower also had great use of the 6-axis controls. Great games like this really helped booster the PlayStation 3's online presence, getting really quirky, artsy gems in the form of games like this. Games like The Puppeteer, which came out later on in the system's life, but this is just an example of these kind of platforming niche genre games where the 360 by this point, starting off with Mistwalker support, Blue Dragon, Lost Odyssey, Xbox 360 was getting RPGs in 2008, 2009, 2010. But as the system went on, it became the home for first-person shooters, and Microsoft kind of turned their backs on the RPG genre and the more Japanese side of things, which for A lot of the mainstream shooter fans wasn't a big deal. Their Xbox was their system of choice. It was going to be no matter what. But for a lot of guys like me that like these more artistic, artsy, niche games and RPGs, the PlayStation 3 emerged as the clear choice. Games like 3D Heroes, which was kind of a spin-off of Zelda in sorts, not any license or any namesake, but it was a very similar game to Zelda in kind of a dot pixelized look. It looks really cool in motion, still a lot of fun to play. This game is a really quirky little action RPG. Dragon's Crown, we saw Vanillaware, who made beautiful games on the PS2, and Odin's Sphere and Grim Grimoire, continue on the PlayStation 3 with Dragon's Crown. Once again, these hand-drawn graphics are just made for HD. This game was awesome, and it looked beautiful on the system. Ni no Kuni was another monster RPG that came out. Level 5, longtime supporters of the PlayStation 2, Dark Cloud, Rogue Galaxy. This was an amazing, cartoonish, almost cel-shaded, just overall a beautiful fantasy-looking game, and it didn't disappoint with me. This was level 5, back to their peak level. I absolutely love Ni no Kuni. A beautiful game, and just showing that if you wanted RPGs, Japanese-style games, the PlayStation 3 was the place to play them. Then we started seeing another Sony studio, Quantic Dream, jump into the ring. They made Indigo Prophecy, which was multi-platform on the PS2 and Xbox, but we saw Heavy Rain release, and this kind of ushered in a love it or hate it style of game, but it was exclusive to the PlayStation 3, and it was kind of like a play-along movie of sorts. I mean, it was, for me, I absolutely loved Heavy Rain. It was like edge-of-my-seat thriller, making decisions that affect the storyline. Absolutely loved Heavy Rain and its choice consequence system and its storyline and its ability to pull emotion out of me. I was emotionally invested in this character and the stories that were going on, and they followed it up with Beyond Two Souls, which was not as well received as Heavy Rain. I still quite enjoyed it, but these are types of games that were only available on PlayStation, and they were very good. Now, you guys know me, I'm a huge Tales of fan, and the series started on the PlayStation. It went on the 360 for Tales of Vesperia, but it seems after that game, Microsoft was completely done with the Tales games, and they all ended up exclusive on the PlayStation 3. A Symphonia bundle, which was a port of the GameCube game and its sequel in HD. We got the brand new Zillia 2. We got Tales of Grace's F, and I loved all these games, and not to mention just Tales. We got a lot of exclusive stuff. If you're an NIS fan, you know, Disgaea, Makai Kingdom, or not Makai Kingdom, that was PlayStation 2, but NIS absolutely went insane on the PS3. There's still games coming out. Persona 5 is yet to come out, but if you like NIS games and they're more quirky, different offerings, then the PlayStation 3 is definitely the system for you. The Adelaire series, they just made a ton of content for the PlayStation 3. Lots of cool, quirky limited editions and things of that nature. So that's another reason the PlayStation 3 really started to pull ahead as the later years went on. Don't get me wrong, I still absolutely love the 360. It's got a lot of great games, but for my role-playing game tastes and my more quirky games, it just seems like the PlayStation 3, most of those games found their home on that console. And before the PlayStation 3 ended its life cycle, we got The Last of Us. Man, what many consider to be, and I might be one of those people, the very best game of that generation. This game was on another level in terms of graphics. Once again, showing the PS3 was very powerful. But Naughty Dog just knows how to make AAA action games. This was a roller coaster ride from start to finish, exclusive to the PlayStation 3. One of the best storylines. I just was so involved in this game as well. It's very tough to find an experience to match The Last of Us. So I just wanted to come on here and just kind of relive what it was like to be an owner of the PlayStation 3 in 2006, 2007. It wasn't a fun time, man. It got pretty hostile there. It seemed like the 360 was just destined to steamroll over the PlayStation 3. It seemed that Sony was poised to go from a distant first place all the way back down, because the Wii was a phenomenon all to itself that just went like a runaway freight train early on in sales. It slowed down later on as the kind of motion gimmick thing kind of fizzled out, but the 360 was just trouncing the PlayStation 3 early on, and the early failure of exclusives didn't help. It just threw more firewood on the fire, and it wasn't until 2009, 2010 where the PlayStation 3 really started to showcase with great exclusive games and a lot of the Japanese support, and appealed to different gamers and really started to come into its own. So yeah, it was just a really interesting time. I was thinking about it the other day, and I thought that it would make a an interesting tale. Go ahead and share your guys' opinions. Did you own a PS3 on those early months? And remember the horrible multi-platform games, the failure of Lair, and people bitching about Heavenly Sword being too short, and the failure of Haze, and just waiting for that big game to come out. It was a rough time. It was a rough time to be a PlayStation 3 fan. And it still stained a lot of people, in a lot of people's minds, that they look at the PlayStation 3 as like the black sheep of the PlayStation universe, because the Sony definitely took all the mistakes they made with the PS3 and did exactly the opposite with PS4. They made it price attractive. They made it easy to develop for. They made it more powerful. So they learned from their mistakes, fortunately. So, guys, as always, I'd love to hear your experiences with the PlayStation 3 early on, your take on it. And thank you for watching. Games of War is nothing without you.